Well, thank you for coming. Welcome to the breakout session, The Next Generation for Marriage, How to Speak for Marriage as the Union of Husband and Wife, featuring Thomas Peters. Today we had a bit of a blip with Maggie Gallagher, who is unfortunately unable to join us, but Thomas is here and he's ready to share with you what he's learned from his wealth of experience blogging and working with young adults, now working with the National Organization for Marriage. So without further ado, Thomas Peters grew up in Southern California and attended college in Michigan. He is the founder of the popular American Papist blog, which can be read at www.catholicvote.org. He has appeared in dozens of TV, radio, and online media outlets discussing current topics, including the intersection of faith and conservatism, as well as pro-life and pro-family activism. Since 2007, he has worked in Washington, D.C., and after completing his second master's, now serves as the cultural director at the National Organization for Marriage, where he is overseeing a new project, NOM Next Gen, to identify and encourage young activists for marriage. He travels around the country speaking to young social conservatives. You can follow him on Twitter at American Papist, or find him at facebook.com/American Papist, and his email is listed as well. So please welcome Tom Peters.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I always seem to get stuck with the late afternoon sessions, which I realize from experience is the hardest session to stay awake and motivated through before you hit your second wind. I typically have 3 shots of espresso in the morning and 3 more shots in the afternoon, and I only had a little bit of coffee, so myself I have to self-motivate before I even get close to engaging with all of you. There's a silver lining to the unfortunate fact that Maggie won't be able to join us today. And that's the fact that Maggie and I talked about when we were planning this session, that we really wanted it to be a next-gen session. School is different than when our parents went to school and were our age. The culture is different than 30 years ago. Our opportunities are different, the challenges and opportunities. All these things have a new context, and so I think it's really important that as the pro-life movement has managed to motivate young people to really make the issue their own and frame it in their own way and fight it in their own manner, we have to do the same thing for marriage. I should also preface this that while I went to school for it seemed like an interminable amount of time and have a couple master's degrees, I'm no longer in academia. I'm in public policy and activism. I work out of NOM's DC office. I help run our website, our social media. I do writing and coalition work, and I do progressively more and more speaking events to actually see how the debates we have on marriage are affecting people of my own age in college settings and young professional settings. And for me, this is like a study lab for me to work on my own arguments and for me to get more of a sense for what's actually happening, because living in DC, you do kind of develop an inside the Beltway mentality, and with as much online activity as I do, you lose kind of the real world implications of what we're looking at. So it's a great benefit for me, and if you have zero interest in the marriage fight in terms of like this being a personal cause for you, at the very least what you can do for me and for the rest of us is give me your full attention, and at any point in anything during what I'm talking about, something doesn't make sense, or you think I could phrase my argument more powerfully, or if you think I've ignored an important question, write that down and let me know about it, and let the group know about it during our Q&A. So at the very least, we'll come out of this with a little bit more understanding of what we're fighting about. Now, since Maggie can't make it, I'm going to try to give you a brief Spark Notes version of how she defends marriage. I've had the opportunity of seeing her deliver this basic speech to a wide variety of settings. I've seen her debate marriage at Georgetown and other academics institutions, plenty of media appearances. And from my own experience, I mostly do media appearances. I'm used to fighting against people who have me in a very narrow soundbite environment, and I have to quickly get a 5-second, 10-second response back before they cut my mic off or go back to the other persons in the interview. So this is like an opportunity for me to kind of briefly unpack the marriage argument, and then I'm going to go to what my speech is actually about, which is the next-gen issue. Oftentimes when the marriage debate is brought up on campus, it's framed in a particular way. The most common thing I see is gay marriage, why not? Or why is DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, unconstitutional? Now, obviously, I think this is kind of a loaded way to start the conversation. It's kind of like starting a conversation, why shouldn't we shut down all nuclear reactors? It's really hard to kind of have a fair debate if that's the way we look at it. And so when I talk about marriage, I don't talk about why shouldn't gay marriage, for instance, be legalized. The question is, what is marriage, and why do we have it? Marriage is there for a unique reason, and it's there to solve a core human problem. And that problem, so to speak, is that since time immemorial, when men and women have sexual relations, more often than not, a baby results. A child who is intimately bound up with the genetic makeup of its parents, who desires to have a relationship with both its mother and father. And related to that problem of the fact that sex normally causes babies, is that wherever a baby is born, you can be pretty sure that a mother is nearby, its mother. You can't be as necessarily sure that a father will be in the room. And so one of the great things that marriage does is it ties fathers as well as mothers to their children for making and raising the next generation. Every successful civilization has figured out how to solve this core problem of how to make and raise the next generation. And societies that lose the value of marriage, that lose the ability to connect mothers and fathers in love to their children, face significant social problems, many of which we've already talked about in terms of economics, in terms of social stability, mobility, a whole host of issues. And so I personally used to be more libertarian on the question of marriage. I used to try to take the easy road out and say, well, should government just get out of the marriage business altogether? There's people arguing for traditional marriage, there's people who want to see gay marriage legalized. Why shouldn't we just leave this to the churches and allow a public contract system for marriage? The problem with that is that marriage is not just a political or legal reality. It's a personal human reality. And anytime the government does not defend a human natural phenomenon as basic as marriage, it actually invites more government intrusion in the family. I think it's Robbie George and others have said that family is the best department of education, healthcare, and welfare. Nothing except the family so provides for the needs of human beings, and especially for the next generation. And so if we try to take a libertarian view of marriage and say that the legal definition doesn't matter, we actually invite a new host of problems. I think there's actually an analogy here to the pro-life, pro-abortion debate, is that if government no longer defends the simple proposition that human beings deserve the right to life from their first moment of conception, it actually results in a huge new set of government intrusions in personal liberty, which I think we've seen. Now, the consequences of redefining marriage are manifold, and one of our challenges is helping people to realize what these consequences are before we've had a generation to examine the results. Our generation has grown up under legalized abortion. The way that people defend abortion nowadays is vastly different from the way that they used to promote legalizing abortion at the time. The difference is time. We've actually had an entire generation to see what legalized abortion actually does to a society, what it actually does in terms of promoting marriage, the well-being of children, church-government relations, individual conscience protections, the role of healthcare, etc. With marriage, we don't have that same situation because we still live in a culture that largely has an intact marriage legal structure in place. And so we can, however, and as our marriage laws deteriorate, we can see more graphically what the results are. One of the biggest consequences of changing the common sense definition of marriage is the types of arguments that are used to redefine it. So one of the first consequences would be, after government redefines marriage, it's basically saying that if people, if human beings, if citizens see a difference between a man and a man coming together, or a woman and a woman coming together, and a man and a woman coming together in marriage, there's something wrong with you if you see even a difference there. And you're actually akin to a bigot, someone who is, for instance, opposed to interracial marriage. These are actually the arguments that the Department of Justice is using to debunk the Defense of Marriage Act. This is actually what gay marriage proponents mean when they use the civil rights movement to baptize their cause. One of the other consequences of redefining marriage that I don't think we quite appreciate as much is how much more difficult it will be to promote a healthy marriage culture if the laws of the country are against a core value of marriage. If you look at the polling of young adults in particular and of people in general, most of us are not comfortable with the rate of divorce. Most of us would like to see divorce happen less often because we are aware of the consequences. How difficult do you think it will be to argue against divorce, which strikes at a core value of marriage, namely fidelity, and the fact that it's a lifelong union? How much more difficult do you think it'll be for all of us to argue against divorce when we can't even agree on a common definition for what makes a marriage in the first place? Just one example of that, there's currently a case pending in Michigan where an Eastern Michigan University psychology student was, as part of her counseling degree, was asked to counsel a same-sex couple, and she politely asked if she could refer them to another counselor because she said because of her Christian beliefs, she did not feel comfortable counseling a same-sex couple. Long story short, she was kicked out of the program and is now suing to try to get reinstated and will have this litigation on her record forevermore. She had an interest in preserving and helping couples, particularly married couples, and because of the idea that it's discrimination to only help heterosexual couples, she now is made less able to help traditional couples. Another consequence of redefining marriage, and one that's most surprising to me in how quickly it's happening, are the threats to religious liberty. When I first started becoming aware of the gay marriage debate, people like Maggie Gallagher and Robbie George would talk about the clear threats to religious liberty. And I heard them, and I heard some of the examples. This was about in 2004. And I was like, well, you know, I really hope that we can work this out and separate the religious liberty issue, the institutional religious liberty issue, from the marriage debate. It appears pretty clear that the proponents of gay marriage aren't interested in separating the two. They really see them as combined. If you look at every state that's legalized gay marriage, and if you look at the vast majority of countries that have legalized gay marriage, religious liberty and the right to speak publicly about the truth of marriage becomes not only chilled, but actually marginalized and persecuted. Just to give one recent example, when New York legalized gay marriage this summer, one of the things it did not include was individual conscience protections for individuals. And so we now have stories of multiple town clerks in rural New York cities that are losing their jobs or having people asking them to be fired because they are choosing not to grant same-sex licenses. That's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, and it's a recent example, and it happened almost immediately after gay marriage was legalized there. To give just another example, in Illinois, which recently introduced, June 1st was the first date that a same-sex civil unions bill was introduced, the Catholic and Lutheran adoption agencies in that state are now having to shut down because the state is terminating their contracts, even though Catholic and Lutheran adoption and foster care agencies have the highest ratings in the state for actually placing children in loving families. All their state contracts are being shut down because they refuse to place children with same-sex couples. There's many other examples of these kind of threats. The other threat, which is probably the threat that we have most experience of, is the threat to free speech and academic liberty. I think you probably know better than I the atmosphere that makes it difficult to, for instance, form an Anscombe Society or a Love and Fidelity chapter and then to host a debate on marriage without encountering huge opposition, name-calling, academic committee investigations, et cetera, et cetera. It's amazing that the educational establishment, which values free speech so much, is so chilling to the free speech of people who believe in traditional marriage. Now, do you think any of those things would become easier? Do you think you would be more able to argue for traditional marriage if the laws of the land have been changed to say that is no longer our shared consensus for what marriage is? That's not what the laws of this country state on the federal or state level. So that's a very brief and probably not nearly close to as convincing and wonderful as how Maggie would present the case for marriage. But I think that's basically how, first of all, I think about it to myself and how I think is the basic contours of the debate. What I've been focusing on since joining NAM is the question of the next generation for marriage. The media loves telling the story, and it almost always mentions this in any time that gay marriage is a political topic, is that young people have given up on marriage. You would think from reading the headlines and looking at the news reports and CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and all this, that basically no one under 30 is for traditional marriage. And this is a very conscientious effort by the proponents of gay marriage. It's part of the myth of inevitability that they try to create, which basically says that yes, there might be a majority of Americans right now who believe in traditional marriage, but as soon as our generation grows up and as soon as we start voting in proportionate numbers, this debate will be all over. So why fight now? Because you're going to lose in the end. This is wrong for a lot of reasons, which is the primary focus of my talk. Just to be objective, while the polling numbers, it is true, are not good, most polling will say 65 to 70% of people under 30/25, depending on how they're doing the data, will say that they're for redefining marriage to include same-sex couples. But in the voting booth, there's a different story. For instance, in California in 2008, during Proposition 8, and remember, this was Obama's star year. This is when supposedly the youth came out to vote in extremely high numbers for Barack Obama in deep blue California, where I grew up. And yet, in Proposition 8 in California, exit polling showed that 45% of people under the age of 30 actually voted for Prop 8. They actually voted for traditional marriage in deep blue California during Barack Obama's get out the vote effort that was extremely, focused on young people. The latest polling we have in Minnesota, for instance, which will have a marriage amendment on the ballot next November, says that only half of young adults under 29 and under would oppose the marriage amendment, and 42% of them would support it. And so just think about that for a moment. In deep blue California, there's 45% of people who believe in traditional marriage. When was the last time you can remember someone under 30 being interviewed on primetime television espousing a cohesive, integrated, pro-marriage view? I don't know of a single instance, honestly, where that's already happening. And yet, with all this cultural pressure, young people still believe in marriage. I think that's a sign of hope. But how are we to understand the numbers? What should we make of the polls that do show a clear majority of young people believing that marriage should be redefined? Glenn Stanton at Focus on the Family makes 5 good points that I want to kind of expand and elaborate on about what the polling actually shows us when it claims that youth agree with gay marriage. First of all, younger generations generally tend to be more permissive than their parents, at least as long as they are still young. When you're in your 20s, having a sexual liberationist personal philosophy is a pretty good one to have, depending on how you actually want to live your life in the practical. Generations can also tend to be more liberal in their views in the theoretical. Their parents were told that the sexual revolution and legalized abortion would be nothing but good things, and that was mistaken. Experience was the best teacher, and it's the best teacher for young people as well. Another fact from the polling is that young adult support for same-sex marriage is relatively thin and underdeveloped. Young people may answer a pollster that they think gay marriage should be legal, but very few have well-thought-out reasons as to why. And there lies a huge opportunity, a huge educational opportunity for us. Also, the polling shows that young supporters of same-sex marriage tend to be less passionate about the issue, and that lack of enthusiasm carries over to the voting booth. Intensity, as much as numbers, matters when we actually look at who's shaping culture and popular opinion. It's also interesting that people who have what pollsters can only measure as a strong faith based on the amount of religious attendance or the amount of times they pray, is that among these groups of young people, their views on marriage are almost as conservative as their parents. In other words, deep faith and conviction do transmit themselves to the next generation far more than weak faith and lax practice do. And so there is an immovable core to people who believe in marriage who really won't go away. There's actually a fascinating social science study, and it's done by a group of scientists in Europe, which said that over a span of 30 to 40 years, all you need for a minority position to become the majority position is for 10% in that minority to absolutely believe in this and to work to make it the majority position. And so the gay rights movement, the gay marriage movement, is very much this phenomenon of a small, core, dedicated, culturally powerful group working systematically to make their views the majority opinion. All we need for marriage is to have not great numbers, but intensity and network and cultural strength to do the same thing, to keep a healthy marriage culture alive politically and legally. This is the most fascinating point, which I haven't really seen anyone tease out, about what the polling shows us on youth attitudes about marriage. Namely, a Pew Forum study from 2004 showed that people in their early 30s have a relatively favorable view of gay marriage, and their views are similar to those of younger people, but people in their late 30s are much more opposed to gay marriage, or rather in favor of traditional marriage. So what happens in that last decade of the 30s? It's an interesting question. I think probably the question is that young 30s, especially for people who've been through graduate school and education, that's the first time in their lives they're probably having kids for the first time themselves, or have friends who are having their first kids for themselves. I'm single. I have friends, though, who have been married 5, 6 years now and are on kid 2, 3, 4. And it's amazing how much it transforms the lives even of people who previously were incredibly interested and excited and passionate about forming a good marriage. There's something about having a child that really changes your views about what it takes to raise a child. And I think if we look into the study, that formative time of whenever you first have a child or whenever your friends start having children really changes your basic attitudes about what is the best thing for children. Why should we care about the marriage debate, and why should we care about changing young adult attitudes about marriage? Doing the heavy lifting to promote a healthy marriage culture is absolutely essential if this generation is to have a promising economic outlook, as we just heard in the talk beforehand, and as Brad Wilcox, the National Marriage Project, has done extensive research about. Simply put, a healthy marriage culture improves all of our prospects, and especially the prospects of the next generation. If we don't like the lack of opportunity we are facing relative to our parents, let's at least work to increase the opportunities for our children. How do we do that? How do we talk freely about defending and promoting a marriage culture? The main thing we have to overcome, I think, is the resistance to our right to ask the question. We have to fight for the right to publicly debate what marriage is. And coupled with that, we need to overcome our personal hesitancy, and I don't think this applies as much to you as it does to a lot of people our age. We have to overcome our hesitancy to feel as if we're coming across as judgmental. I'm expecting that you've already made this leap into publicly stating opinions that may reflect poorly or positively on other people's life choices. And if you've made that leap, you've already had that line thrown in your face, how could you be so judgmental? But in my experience, being pro-something, having a pro-something platform is the best way to avoid that problem, that insult, that attempt to shut down the debate. I always say when I'm debating this to a majority of people who are against my position that I'm not against gay people, unmarried people, cohabitating people, divorced people, and frankly, married people. I'm for marriage as an ideal and as a lived reality that enriches people's lives and provides best for the next generation. If anyone finds something wrong with that statement, the idea that children, in the best case, deserve a mother and a father, it's up to them to prove what's wrong, not you. You own the high ground because that is the high ground in the debate. That's the truth of what we're talking about. I'm actually amazed at how many young people still believe in marriage. Often when they think that they're the only ones on campus or part of the very, very tiny, tiny minority. Imagine how much progress we can make in educating our generation, how much bang for the buck we can get considering how little infrastructure we currently have. Love and fidelity is a new thing. The Anscombe Society is a slightly older, but still relatively a very new thing. We can take a lot of encouragement from the progress that's been made in converting young people to pro-life positions. Now, interestingly enough, in some studies, more young people believe in abortion rights than believe in gay marriage. Why the difference? First of all, millennials have grown up with legalized abortion, as I said, and are more likely to know its harmful effects firsthand. And we can't say the same thing about gay marriage. The second reason why there's more of a pro-life infrastructure among young people is outreach. Pro-lifers over a generation have significant networks of young people to help get their message across and frame it in particular ways that young people respond to. I would argue that the most effective pro-life organization in America right now, the one that has most successfully changed the debate in recent history, is Live Action. Its founder, Lila Rose, is 23. I think maybe she's turned 24 years now. Live Action is effective partially, yes, because of the people who have come before, the people who have blazed the pro-life path. But it's particularly effective because of the outside-of-the-box tactics, the laser-like focus, and the boundless enthusiasm and optimism that youth have. It's my hope that we can do the same thing for marriage, and that's the purpose of the project I've been working to develop, which is called NOM Next Gen for Marriage. There's a lot of excellent groups that promote marriage to young people. What I don't think we have yet is a group from young people to talk about marriage, to defend their collective rights, to ask the question, to defend marriage, to protect marriage, and then ultimately, which I think I and some of the people I work with can help with, is connect young people who've decided they want to take a public stand for traditional marriage and give them the media platform and the political tools and connections they need to get that message widely known. I would love to have, for instance, a list of people, young people, under 30 in every state, who are willing to take a call or email from me saying, hey, there is a gay marriage debate happening in your state legislature. Do you want to go and give 3 minutes of testimony? I would love to have a list on a state level of young people who are willing to write an op-ed defending traditional marriage. The opportunities are manifest, and one of the things that the gay rights movement has done very well is finding the people who are already willing to do this and connecting them to the political and cultural opportunities that are always around us. I think as part of that, what we have to also develop is a network of support for each other. NOM recently launched what's called the Marriage Anti-Defamation Alliance, which is to A, tell the stories of people who have come under persecution for defending traditional marriage, and B, to provide them a support network and ways of addressing their rights. In most cases, when gay activists try to go after someone who's publicly defended marriage, the person has First Amendment rights, has employment rights that they're trying to strip away through focused pressure, through lawsuits, et cetera. And having the experience that NOM has had and that we can very quickly connect them. Those same resources I want to make available to young people. If you're if you're at a campus and you're going under flack for trying to rent event space, if they're trying to strip your status as an officially recognized club, there's a huge amount that can be done if you're willing by simply getting a reporter to tell your story. It's amazing how often I hear stories and I've worked with students who have come under persecution, and as soon as the local Fox News affiliate shows up and starts taping stories, the administration suddenly backs off and says, no, we just were discussing it. I know of other stories where that attention was never given and the clubs were just shut down. I don't see any reason why people shouldn't have the right to defend marriage anywhere, especially in a campus environment that promotes free speech. So NOM Next Gen and the Anti-Defamation Alliance are two resources I want to offer if you feel called and if you want to be part of this fight. But before I forget to say it, my email address is also publicly available. If you have any question about social science research, about polling policy, that's a lot of what I do every day, and I'm happy just to be your dedicated research assistant, at least to point you in the right direction. The incredible opportunity and what makes me excited about this project is that I like to win. That's why I was active in pro-life stuff, and I still am, but they're doing pretty well, and they don't really need me as much. Marriage needs many people to help win this victory. It's a really good experience to undergo persecution. As I tell a lot of people I talk to, when I first got involved in the job, there was a lot of efforts to attack me. There's actually full-time blogs dedicated just to tracking NOM's efforts. Within 24 hours of officially being listed as working for NOM, there was a website that had gone through and found all the Google search information they could find, all the LinkedIn information. They tried to get to my Facebook account. They followed me on Twitter. They started harassing my friends on Twitter. All this kind of crazy stuff. There's actually 2 or 3 blogs dedicated just to exposing me and my efforts to impose theocracy on America. I've never been taken so seriously in my life until I got involved in the marriage issue. But after a few weeks of that, and after a couple angry emails and this threat and that threat, you just wake up one morning and you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Is that the best they got? And right now we can be grateful that that's really the most it gets. They try to give you the sense they're going to threaten your job prospects. They're going to give you a sense that you're going to be known on the internet now as a bigot and a hater. And that's really only the tools, that's the only tools they have. Now, a lot of people obviously don't want to sign up for that, but it's pretty clear that if you want to be successful in life, if you want to actually stand for the things that you most believe are true, you're going to have to go through that experience at some point in your life. It's good to go through that experience younger than older, just so you know what the rules of the game are, and then you become a really effective person in whatever thing you choose. And so I'm not saying you have to stake your claim on the marriage issue, but I know personally for me that after going through this, it's really a liberating sense to actually know what it's like to get persecuted, to have people try to make you give up your views or stand down, and not do it. That's actually what makes the really dangerous activists, if I can use a politically charged term. What's our opportunity as a group? The opportunity is that I am a proud conservative. One of the myths that I think pushes a lot of progressive people is the myth of inevitability, and one of the things they need to see is that they're transmitting their ideas to the next generation because they want their ideas to have a future. And that means one of the things they hate hearing the most is that they've lost the youth. I have witnessed a relative implosion in the pro-abortion lobbyists in DC as groups like Live Action, as the pro-life movement only gains steam, and as they realize that most young people want more restrictive laws on abortion than are currently on the books. That is hugely sapping the strength of the pro-abortion machine, at least politically. Even if they don't show it, but the emails keep getting more desperate, and I'm on all the pro-abortion email lists. We can do the same thing for marriage, and actually, if we only do a little bit, we discourage them far more than the amount of effort we have to put into it. Progressives hate hearing they've lost the youth. So part of the task of, let me just actually go back to my script here. Yeah, by our very existence, by our very active involvement in this issue, we encourage everyone else engaged in the fight to protect marriage. We'll never know in this life how much good we've done by taking the hard but right stand for the truth. The older people in this movement, and they're my mentors, they're our mentors, who are tempted to give up on the marriage fight, get reinvigorated by seeing us here. We're actually helping them to a huge degree keep fighting the battle because they know that whatever work they do, whatever limited time they have, comparatively, there will be a next generation who stands up for marriage. Part of the task of defeating gay marriage is restoring confidence in traditional marriage. I'm going to try to wrap up in the next 5 or so minutes so we can get to the Q&A. The last part I want to give you is a little bit of the research on where young people's views on marriage are, to give you a little bit of an idea for what the top priorities can be for building a marriage culture, which largely don't have to do necessarily with gay marriage, but a culture that's lost an idea of marriage as a culture that's most open to redefining it. So part of the task, the real task of defeating gay marriage as an idea, is restoring confidence in traditional marriage. A study that the Marriage and Research Public Policy Institute, I can show it to you and send it to you, revealed the vast majority of students, especially college students, still aspire to be married. Almost 9 out of 10 young adults believe that there is too much divorce. I was amazed by that too. I think it's 89%. So even if young people are discouraged about how they see marriage reflected in society, they still admire and love the ideal of lifelong married love. And whatever they may say in their tests and in their exams about what they believe about gender roles, they still largely, even sometimes subliminally, subscribe to traditional attitudes about complementary gender roles. I think there's huge progress to be made here in terms of reclaiming the right, first of all, to say that yes, men and women are absolutely equal, but they have diverse and complementary strengths which come together beautifully in a healthy marriage. I think there's also a huge opportunity to discuss and explain what precisely a couple commits to when they choose to get married. In all the research, commitment is the first adjective that young people use to describe marriage. I think working on what commitment actually means is a huge thing. And we're not talking about a political fight. We're just saying, what does it mean to commit to marriage? I know that at least in the Catholic tradition, and I'm Catholic, is that the majority of, not just Catholic, but Christian denominations, the religious ceremony surrounding marriage is not simply a man and woman saying, "I choose to marry you," to each other. The actual words of the marriage vow they recite have a specific content to them which explain the type of commitment that marriage is. There's a pedagogical element to marriage vows in most Christian wedding vow traditions. For instance, Catholic vows typically say, for instance, "I promise to accept children lovingly from God." That's part of what Catholics say they are signing on to when they commit to becoming married. Some more interesting findings about youth attitudes about marriage. The natural connection between marriage and sexual monogamy and fidelity is very strong. But the connection between marriage and child rearing is relatively weak. Most young people see children within marriage as an optional accessory that should be pre-agreed to. That's how they approach it. And this is doubtless because of sort of the contraceptive mentality. I'm not going to get into the contraception question, but it's a lot easier to talk about redefining marriage if we've lost the idea that the sexual faculty of men and women has a natural orientation, a natural telos to actually having children. So it remains an area where much work needs to be done. And as I said, there's this silver lining to the gay marriage debate, and it's significant. I think the one great thing about the gay marriage fight is it's forcing us to not take marriage for granted anymore. It's forcing us to ask the fundamental question, what is marriage? Why is marriage the way it is, and not some other way? What would society look like? We can actually ask ourselves now, if marriage as an institution was abandoned by the majority of people. How would we fill in the sentence, if marriage did not exist, men, women, and their children would what? That's a question that's a real one for us now. And we actually have a chance to deepen our collective cultural understanding of marriage precisely because of the crisis it's in now. That's a great opportunity for us to debate, an opportunity to answer for ourselves within our human tradition one of the greatest questions about life and how to live it fully and fruitfully. And that's a debate always worth having. I'd like to include just some quick action items to kind of fill out the list more of opportunities I see for next-gen people to get more involved in the marriage fight, and then I'm happy to open up for Q&A. One of the things that gay marriage activists do very well is recruit space, people, and academic leaders on campus. I had never really thought about this concept before, but if a gay-straight alliance or an LGBT center actually sets up a space on campus, it's a claim. It's a claim saying we own this space. This is a safe spot for us. This is our headquarters, our center. We should be doing that as well. Not necessarily on the full brick structure, though I think you could probably find a lot of people of means who'd be happy to sponsor such a brick and mortar, or at least a continual space. Another opportunity is to write articles, blogs, write to the student newspaper, letters to the editor. I can't tell you the amount of things on the other side I have to read daily because they simply have a habit of promoting their views in the secular mainstream media. Host debates, debate yourself, prepare arguments and talking points. The opportunity I talked about before, appearing at state legislatures, I think is extremely powerful. One of the things that has happened in many states that have had gay marriage debates recently is that they will have a young person, 14, 15, 16, walk into the state legislature and just read a prepared script saying, you know, please do this for my parents, please do it for the future. This is the voice of the young talking to you now. It'd be nice if we at least had both sides of young people there, where currently we only have one. I've actually tried to invite young people before to do those debates, and the fact that they've never done it before, thought this is an opportunity, is something you have to overcome. It's an inertia that we could easily eliminate just by making people aware of the opportunity. The most important thing to do for marriage is to join the network. No matter what you actually do, no matter how much time you commit, including nothing, the most important thing is to, if there's an ANSCOM Society Love and Fidelity Network chapter, join it. Appear on the list. Join the National Organization for Marriage's newsletter. Join the Facebook group, the Twitter. Just be aware and around so that when you see something happening, you know about it, and then your creativity can spark in and help you join the marriage fight. Stand up for marriage. It's worth it. Thank you very much.
One of the questions, sort of when you're outlining the argument for marriage as a human institution, beginning with the very human reality of relations bearing children and what to do them. The question I always get in having debates with peers and the like is, well, what about heterosexual folks who are infertile or aged, things like that?
Right. Because
then the sort of fecundity argument doesn't seem to hold true. So I was wondering your thoughts on that. And maybe this would be better if we could chat afterwards, but I have some questions, particularly in regards to the so-called gay rights movement in a Catholic university setting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm inundated at Georgetown with gender liberation weeks, with coming out weeks, with LGBTQ center, this, that, and the other. It was all set up in the name of so-called Jesuit values, whatever the hell that means. I mean, I don't know. But I don't know if these folks have ever read Ignatius or anything like that.
What's happening there?
I'd love to get, maybe your father, being a canon lawyer, could be of some assistance there. But I just got an email yesterday. They're setting up an LGBTQ house.
Right. Space.
Oh, they already have the space, a residence, actually. And I just don't know how that jives, particularly with the Catholic point of view. Basically.
I can give you a little bit of a clue of what I'm seeing on the second part, then I'll answer your first question. I'm actually working on a report. There's a lot of publicly available evidence that the gay marriage activists have largely moved from having a public intellectual debate to having an effort to silence the chief opposition. And it's just an empirical truth that the mainstream Christian denominations are the most intense, the most focused opponents of redefining marriage. And a lot of publicly available data would show that the Arcus Foundation, which is an LGBT rights organization, and Tim Gill, who's personally wealthy to the score of $450 million, have invested a huge amount in funding what I would call dissenting Catholic operations, such as Catholics for Equality or other educational outlets. So what they'll typically do is it's a very coordinated effort to destroy the common witness within a Christian denomination. And they do this for Catholics, they do this for Lutherans, they do it for Southern Baptists, because it's really an effort to sow dissension in the ranks of the enemy as they see it. And so, just for instance, I was covering a story about what they'll do is they'll recruit they'll get together a couple $100,000 in grant money, and they'll say, we want to host a forum on LGBT issues in the Catholic community at Fordham, say. And it's very difficult for administration to A, turn down the money, and B, concoct the reason, unless they have like a strongly principled stance for why there are some questions that are outside of Catholic purview, certainly in terms of having all the panelists be for redefining things like traditional marriage, for the coercion of religious liberty, that really are against the institutional founding of it. So the bottom line is that this kind of stuff just does not spring up spontaneously. Wealthy gay donors have a network where they allow people who want to do this stuff to be funded. And we do not have as well developed a network. So as a Catholic, I care deeply about Catholic identity and institutions, not to shut down debate, but to say that if the debate's going to happen on our property, it's going to happen fairly. And I can't remember the last time that a liberal bench, like someplace like Berkeley, invited a host of all pro-marriage panelists paid for to talk about why marriage is good. If we're going to have a fair national debate, let's at least, give equal airtime. And certainly not, it's again sort of like the idea of tolerance is that you tolerate my beliefs, and that's what our tolerance is. So, to your first question, though.
Can I actually follow up just on that really quickly?
Yeah.
You said we don't have sort of...
As large, yeah.
I would submit to you the hierarchy of the church. So I'm asking, what are our options in terms of canon law? What are our recourses to the hierarchy?
That's a conversation we should have afterwards, and I'm happy to have it, yeah. As far as the question about what to say about couples who cannot have children, there's a lot to say. The most fundamental thing to say is that even for a heterosexual sterile couple, any children they choose to adopt, they still will be able to give them the fundamental rights of a child to know and be loved by a mother and a father, and the unique things. The social science, as much as it's disputed publicly, does strongly favor the idea that the best outcomes for children are a committed, happy mother and father. And so the fact that heterosexual couples that cannot conceive children biologically through each other, they don't contradict a core value of marriage, as much as saying that marriage is any two people who have a loving interest in each other. So I think that's the first thing. The other thing numerically to remember is that many couples who believe that they are sterile actually end up having a child. I think most of us have the experience of knowing couples, not saying obviously there are some couples who, if a woman has a hysterectomy, it's not going to happen. I'm not expecting a miracle. But just that there's the intrusive option for the government to then have like a fertility test no one would agree to that. And so it's really used as more of an argument to separate procreation as a component of marriage. There's a difference between, it's actually, you have a philosophical thing, is that there's a power and then the action of that power. Heterosexuals have the innate power to reproduce, whereas a same-sex relationship does not. That's not why we build our public policy the way we do. It's not the way marriage it is, but it gives you a little more of the deeper grounding there.
We have a campaign at our school where people will wear these red shirts and say, like, love is love is love is love. And I think that's the main argument of changing the definition of marriage from the opposing side, is that, well, I know gay couples and I want them to be happy, so I don't want to take this option away from them. And that's a really dicey argument to contest, and I was wondering how you would recommend we respond to those situations.
Sure. Well, first of all, the argument love is love isn't the most persuasive argument once you get past the emotion. You can use the argument love is love to endorse a huge host of social ills that are still largely condemned, such as incest. So as far as like that being a debate for redefining marriage, the simple way I find to respond to that is, yes, love is love, but not all loves have the same consequences and have the same dimensions. I love bagels, and I love my best friend, but the unique and special love between a man and a woman is the only type of love where new life is generated. And so you're absolutely right, though, that for people who wish to redefine marriage, the core vision of marriage that they subscribe to is that marriage is an emotional, deep commitment to love and care for another person. That's against the traditional view of marriage, that marriage is for the next generation and for the complementarity and mutual flourishing of the sexes. And so you're right that it's not just a label of gay marriage and traditional marriage. The label is two competing definitions and understandings of marriage. So my simplest thing when people ask me, well, love is say yes, but not all love is the same. I don't know of any person who would say even that my love for my girlfriend is the same as that guy's love for his girlfriend, in as much as we are individuals. We can take a generality of the fact that he's a man and she's a woman, and that's where government, that's where culture, that's where human society actually can legislate meaningfully. Another point that I didn't bring up in the debate, which kind of touches on this, is that a lot of the reasons given to redefine marriage come down to benefits, come down to tax status, etc. It's pretty clear that there's, and it's actually happening, that there's many different legal ways to fix all of the inequalities that gay marriage proponents say cause current laws to be discriminatory. For instance, reciprocal beneficiaries is a way to allow, for instance, two aged sisters to have rights of inheritance, to have hospital visitation rights. These legal mechanisms are already in place. And when I go back to someone who's promoting gay marriage and say, if love is love, why shouldn't two sisters get to get married for the exact same reasons? I haven't heard a good response to that. And the thing is, their gut reaction is almost to say yes. And I'm like, well, do you see again how at a certain point, if love is love, then we're not talking about marriage anymore. If we want to talk about legalities, that's been offered. But every state where they actually have like a full same-sex civil unions bill that has all the rights and privileges of marriage without the name of marriage, they're still fighting to redefine marriage there. Because it's about cultural acceptance. So, but we need to get shirts to say, you know, we got to think of a better slogan. If you think of one, I'll help you to get them, you know, made. Thank you.
We always hear conservatives talk about the free market as an opportunity for people to get out of poverty, and that's all good and everything. But is there a point? Do you believe that it is our job to articulate the case for marriage as the permanent union of a husband and wife on an economic level that brings people out of poverty? Is that a fair point? The other question is, exit polls show that 30% of gay and lesbian Americans voted for their Republican congressional candidate last year in 2010. 30%. How do we keep them in our coalition?
To the second question first, I think there's actually a lot of common ground to be, I mean, there's a lot of common ground that people as human beings have in conservative values. There's actually, well, the most silenced minority I've come across in the gay marriage fight is people who self-identify as gay or lesbian who also believe in traditional marriage. The kind of flack I receive is nothing compared to the public shaming and personal vendetta that these people have. Richard Waghorn in Ireland is one example. Eve Tushnet here in the United States wrote an amazing piece in the New York Times several years ago. And so there's, you know, the idea, part of the problem is that progressives and the gay marriage advocates see a direct 100% correlation between sexual orientation and political agenda, which many gay people do not share. For instance, I wasn't aware of those exit polls, but the 37% of people who voted for the Republican congressional candidate could have been doing it for economic reasons. To say, I'm an employee, I have a business, and for these reasons, I think I'll have a better, business climate. So I think conservatism at its core, there's no contradiction to someone who has deep-seated same-sex attraction to being a conservative. I think actually the problem is this idea that sexual orientation predetermines political agenda. For instance, someone who is not acting on their same-sex attraction could very much want to see the religious liberty of churches and institutions to continue to provide loving responses, to provide means and resources for people struggling with, all sexual attractions, including, for denominations that don't believe in premarital sex, support for young people who are trying to save themselves from marriage. So I think that's part of it. Can you remind me what your first question was?
Marriage as benefits of traditional marriage.
Right.
Social. Conservatives always articulate for the free market to lift people out of poverty. Traditional marriage.
Not in the, I'm not sure if this is on the record, but I don't mind saying this publicly, not in the establishment Republican Party. There is a continual inside the Beltway mentality among many in the GOP leadership and the RNC that want to not talk about social issues anymore. As far as presidential candidates, whatever your feelings about the man personally, Rick Santorum has been a huge champion for making the explicit connection between the breakdown of marriage and social and cultural norms and the increase in economic poverty and inequality. At the very end of the presidential roundtable in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago, he got in one soundbite. It was supposed to be all about financial issues. At the very end, he says, I forget exactly what he said, but he said something like, we have to talk about how the breakdown of family is causing the economic divide. And the great amount of the research that we saw up on the board in earlier sessions shows clearly how a broken marriage culture. One fascinating example, which I just completely blew my socks off when I heard it, is that a lot of people have this perception that young African-American males are more likely to commit crime. Though, if you actually look at the data, and if you account for the fact of fatherlessness, young Caucasians and young African-Americans actually incarcerate at the exact same rate if they don't have a father active in their lives. And so it's not an issue in the African-American community of an innate desire to commit crimes or poverty. It's actually a lack of fatherness. As far as the current president, it's shocking to me that I appreciate President Obama's efforts to promote fatherhood as a good thing, as an honorable thing that men are called to. But it's shocking to me that he simultaneously sees marriage laws as discriminatory, which are the single best way to connect fathers in love to their children. So, great questions. Thank you.
I work with college students here at Princeton, and one thing I'm noticing is that there seems to be sort of a disconnect between this idea of marriage, and students kind of think, oh, well, it's down the line, it's in the future. What they don't really have the sense that they need to do something now to defend it. And so I guess my question is, and that's something to be concerned about, because then it almost encourages behavior in a culture here that's highly sexualized, that is centered around kind of hookup culture, and that ends up extending into past college life. And I've been out of college for 5 years, and I've seen this with my friends who didn't really value marriage in college, and so they've had a hard time valuing it out of college, and they kind of think that, well, it's, you know, something to be concerned about in my late 20s, maybe early 30s, but not really going to have a view on it early in college. So how can we get students to value marriage on the universities?
I think that that's much more the role of Love and Fidelity in the Anscombe Society. I wouldn't presume to tell them how to do their job, because I think they're doing such a magnificent job at precisely that. The thing I could add, though, is that certainly at a college like Princeton, political activism and opinion forming is happening at a very rapid rate. And there's no reason not to expect that young people can, you know, walk and chew gum at the same time. They can go to their studies and also be a part of these public policy issues. I would say that being involved more politically in the gay marriage fight forces you to confront a lot of deep philosophical and cultural questions that are part of your education. And I think that if we had more of a fair debate about marriage, then you would actually get to see, I mean, I think that looking at what marriage is socially and culturally can filter down to a personal level. I think that, you know, I think working with people on the abortion issue, that realizing the risks of hasty sexual activity, whatever, realizing the human risks and the human consequences of not living a life of sexual integrity, and being involved in, if you're involved in the pro-life issue and you go to an abortion clinic and you're praying outside a clinic or doing counseling, and you meet young women, not on the night like out at the club where they're having a great time, but years later when they've actually had a child with someone who's not going to stick by them, that's when suddenly their own choices, the person who's actually counseling them is actually receiving some reinforcement of why this is why I'm trying to remain pure, this is why I'm trying to save myself from marriage, this is why marriage is important. And I think the same thing can happen on the marriage issue. Does that help kind of what you're... No, absolutely not. And I'm not limiting people's, you know, creativity and what people are passionate about. I think, you know, I would love if we had a culture that respected life and respected marriage. I'd love to be working on human trafficking. I'd love to be working on divorce, childhood poverty. And there are people who are doing all those things. I don't see enough people focusing enough on marriage. Marriage is sort of a catch-all in my mind that takes so many different things to understand and talk about and understand well. Culturally, legally, politically, socially, personally, sexuality. I mean, it's really the whole package, because it's one of the most important decisions that human beings make. So, you know, maybe that there's a cart and horse, chicken and egg problem of which goes first. But imagine what a different ethos on campus would be inspired if people were learning the facts about marriage and a marriage culture and the disasters when a marriage culture falls apart, instead of what my impression and what a lot of my experience has been in, you know, excellent educational institutions that just have a very different view of the human person, which works very well if you're in Princeton, but doesn't work very well if you're just trying to have a healthy, happy life. So.
Well, does it always have to be framed a fight, I guess?
Absolutely not. No. Oh.
I guess that's sort of what I would like to see more of. Value of marriage, and yeah, there's going to be opposition.
I think that's where minds and hearts are actually changed. I don't think that in most of my work, if ever, I've really converted someone. But my hope is that the sort of things that I'm doing provide resources and tools and motivation and encouragement for realizing that every personal conversation you have, every personal witness you have to living a life of sexual integrity is huge. One of my father's favorite sayings is that people will always tell you the bad things you do. People will rarely tell you the good things you've done. And so living a life of integrity and having the courage of your convictions to share your beliefs, especially about important things like marriage and life, who knows what kind of seeds that's planted that will only come to fruition years later after people have made mistakes in their freedom and autonomy. So, but I think that what you're talking about is not necessarily the calling that I have or what I'm best at, but it sounds like it's yours. So I can't really see if anyone else has.
Well, I really appreciated what you were saying about how you mentioned that people with really deep-seated religious values often fall on the side of support for traditional marriage. And then later on, you mentioned that there was a lot of common ground across faith lines. And so a lot of the student groups here and those thinking about starting student groups are really interested in unifying people across faith lines. So I'd be interested to hear your opinion about what can be done to help people really reach out and mobilize and unify them, and then how.
Marriage is an incredible ecumenical opportunity. I'm cradle Catholic, born and raised, and I went to Catholic school for 8 years, college and grad school. And so in those environments, I didn't really have much ecumenical conversation except theoretically reading about, Calvin or Luther, et cetera. But the marriage fight is really an incredible unifying opportunity for the various Christian and Jewish denominations. I've been to New York rallies with Orthodox rabbis in Maryland where we had a marriage fight and won earlier this year. It was majority African American churches that defended marriage there. And so that's been an extraordinary opportunity. What is concerning to me is how much effort, as this gentleman mentioned, is being expended on trying to split the religious communities over the marriage issue. There's a real concerted effort to tear away the natural connections that people who share Christian beliefs in the goodness of marriage and family over this precise issue. As far as what that happens interpersonally, I find incredible joy and fulfillment through working in a common cause on the marriage issue with people of all denominations. It is true that the majority of people who actually have the courage to defend marriage come from a strong faith background. You have to have already sort of a countercultural mentality to explicitly put yourself in a very countercultural position, not in terms of what the majority of people believe, but in terms of what the cultural power is telling you should believe. Is that kind of what you're...
Yeah, I guess more practically speaking, in the work that you've done, you are very good at mobilizing people and unifying them regardless of faith background. How can students learn from?
Well, just I think one way to remember, and I have a lot to learn about how Love and Fidelity and Anscombe Society practically work. I've heard a lot of stories and it sounds excellent. But just realize that the fight over marriage is, yes, a fight over religious liberty. Yes, it's something that faith illuminates us, but it's also something that can be known through human reason and experience. And that's something that all human beings share by right of the fact that they're created in the image of God, speaking as a Catholic and as a Christian. And so I think that's probably the first place to start, is realizing that it's not a religious dispute about the goodness of marriage. It's a difference of expression, difference of accent, but largely it kind of ends up in the same ways, which I think is a testament to, just to put on my Catholic hat, the truth of the revelation, that faith complements reason. And more work needs to be done on that. So it's actually interesting. One sad story I know of is in Minnesota, I forget which Lutheran denomination, but for 30 years, Lutherans, pastors, and Catholic bishops have gone on retreat every year just to talk about ecumenical issues in private as brothers in Christ. And this year, from everything I've heard, they're not going to talk about the upcoming marriage amendment because it's just too divisive. I think there's really a breakdown in ecumenical relations and ecumenical dialogue when you say something as fundamental as what is marriage, what is God's plan for marriage, is off the table. I think if we had if the cultural and political forces were different, we could actually have that open debate, even in those kind of private meetings. So that's something to avoid. We've got to work to fix that. Maybe one more question?
We focus on what is marriage, but my concern is how do we ensure that marriage lasts? Right. My concern is a long-lasting marriage. Mm-hmm. So for people that are young adults in their 20s and early 30s, we are constantly being encouraged to marry later. Get your education, marry later. What we don't realize, statistics show that there's a higher probability of divorce. And right. I too, I'm a Christian, and you try to reconcile. Okay, so you're young and you're married and there are so many people that are dissuading you and no one is encouraging you in ways to ensure that you have a marriage that will stand the test of time. One of the biggest disadvantages for young married people is that there is no strong example of a strong marriage. Right. So if I'm going to fight for it, I need to see it working.
Right.
And how, I'm all about public policy and changing minds, but the proof is in the pudding. Yeah. Experientially. How do we ensure the African community is fighting for marriage, but the truth is, a lot of marriages aren't standing. Mm-hmm. They may be committed to marriage, but they're not committed to each other. So therefore, there's adultery, there's divorce, there's a high rate of divorce. Right. How do we safeguard long-lasting marriages where there are people that are committed to each other and committed to making it work for the next generation?
That's an excellent question. I do, a lot of let's talk first about sort of like religious communities. A lot of the pastors I speak with have admitted in meetings that I've been at and just hearing them speak that the debate over marriage got them awake to the fact they weren't doing enough to support the marriages that were already in their churches. And I think there's a lot more, there still needs to be more, but there's a lot more efforts to actually help people, especially go through the hard times. And so National Marriage Week, which we had a representative here before, is trying to make that a national awareness project. The Ruth Institute, which is a non-educational project, has just a very simple idea. They just tape young people saying, I believe lifelong married love is possible. You know, and we need those examples. One of the most powerful things I heard was from a man who said that, you know, his generation, he's a baby boomer, he's in his 60s. He said, one of the things that we parents have to do for our children is admit that we didn't get everything right, and that to say, I'm trying to help you avoid the mistakes I made, and to get over our own pride in admitting to our children that we were wrong, that if we, you know, slept around before we were married, if we got divorced, you know, whatever things have happened, and we know them. To have that courage to say, I'm still called to be my child's parent. I'm still called to try to help them avoid mistakes that they'll regret. So those are all kind of conversations that I've only heard just happening in the last few years, and I think part of it is that we're having this national debate about it. And this is not exactly what you asked about, but just to add in, and I think it kind of talks about the same thing, is that there are efforts to protect marriage in terms of when they're in a crisis mode. Maggie Gallagher just worked on a paper which is already being turned into a policy to try to make it, to give a cooling off period to couples that are pursuing divorce. There's been studies that show that if you give people about a year time with counseling to talk through their problems, especially if they have children, there's there's a great number of people who really just needed to have an intervention to save that marriage. And right now, it's easier to get out of a marriage in no-fault divorce states than it is to get out of a contract to have your lawn mowed. There's something deeply wrong about that if we actually care about marriage. And again, it's like we're not forcing people into anything, but we are forcing them to accept the consequences of a choice they made before. So I think all those things are part of it. I'm not sure which one's the silver bullet, but I think another important thing that's not talked about enough is just the idea of forgiveness and second chances. And it doesn't matter what mistakes people have made. It doesn't matter what mistakes have, you know, hurt you or been done to you by other people, but there's always a second chance for all of us. You know, so in that sense, there's never ever a complete defeat as long as we're alive.
Sure.
Thank you.